Hey, one thing that I'll mention, it doesn't have to happen now, but it's just as a reminder, if hopefully you have scheduled it for Saturday evening, May 7th, from 5 to 9. There's things happening at school right before then, by the way. No, okay. Yes, there's a concert right from 3 to 5. But anyway, right here we start. We'll be back and forth between cafeteria and here throughout the night. We will have some dinner. We will have some cake. We'll have a vote to see which cake is this year's winner. Mr. B and I will tell you more about that. There is a $5 cover that night because the school doesn't cover any of this. I don't ask them to either, but I ask us all kind of to chip in. Particularly next week, whether I'm here or Mr. B is here, I'll be showing up with various points, grab those guys, to say, hey, if you are coming, one, I want to know numbers so that I can order appropriate amounts of stuff, but two, also to kind of collect that $5. No checks, just cash, please. But if you have that saying, you're coming, see me at the end, I can get your name, mark it off, and kind of just throw it here in the envelope and all that kind of stuff. Okay. I'll send out an email to you guys and parents about that too, just remind me of that stuff. Okay. If you can't come for all of it, you're welcome to come for whatever you want, right? But also do know, this probably doesn't apply to anybody here. If you decide to come and for cup bars, I'm with my friends for cup bars, and kind of there. If your parents ask me to tell the truth of what I saw, okay, just to realize. I'm not expecting that, but anyway. Congress! Let's start with saying cup and saucer. Washington is talking to Madison, and by the way, they're finding new archaeological evidence about Madison. They thought he had a humble little house. They found that that was like the servants, not servants, but like, a little cottage. But this real house, they're actually finding archaeology. It's like bigger than they thought. There was like, hey, Jefferson had Monticello, and Madison had a team little place, and now there's screwing our clock today, some stuff. But I digress. I'm trying to stay focused. Cup, saucer, illustration. They're having tea. Madison's pouring the tea, and or Washington might have poured it, who knows? Actually, it's probably coffee because they're getting away from the British tea, right? And the comment seems to go, oh, look, it's Congress. And Washington's probably like, Madison, what are you drinking or smoking or whatever, right? And he said, no, wait, the cup is like the house. It contains the boiling passions of the people, right? Remember at the beginning, it was the only body that was directly elected, right? The saucer, which holds the cup in place, acts as kind of like a check that tempers, that cools the passions of the people, right, that are found and epitomized in the house, right? So that cup saucer illustration kind of gets us to think a little bit about kind of Congress as a bicameral institution. One thing just to think about, Article 1, you should be looking at the Constitution a little bit. Article 1, Section 8 has 27 different powers. It's not that you need to have them all memorized, but be aware, Congress is given the most power in the Constitution compared to the other two branches, okay? And just think with those. We said the two biggest were purse and commerce, right? That's your starting point. You get a question where you got to look at how Congress checks or influences another branch, president or bureaucracy or courts or whatever. Start with purse and commerce. Start there. At least if you're just throwing stuff on the wall hoping it sticks, those two got the best chance of sticking somehow. Okay? And probably you're in a ballpark where you can take that, spin it, and make it work. Right? But there's a lot of other things they do. I think, weights and standards. Weights and measures, that's not too sexy, but it's important. You want to make sure your gallon of milk is actually a gallon of milk, otherwise somebody's ripping you off. And ripping off a whole bunch of people, right? So that stuff actually matters, right? And the Congress can make legislation on that, or patents and copyrights. Well, who cares? Ask some broke musician who cares, right? Ask somebody who takes your idea and suddenly makes millions off of it because they get to market faster than you, but it was your idea and it's not checked, right? That stuff matters for people's intellectual property, people's intellectual creations, right? Those things matter, right? Great check. Congress creates courts. The Supreme Court's already there, but they decide the number and they decide kind of the scope that the Supreme Court can handle. But lower level courts, appellate, and district courts, Congress creates that. There's not a set number. There's 94 district courts. Okay, great. Who decided that? Congress. Right? So there's a whole lot of influence that Congress has to courts, right? As they should, because they're the primary policy body. Some other things, right? Define offenders' piracy. But that's a foreign policy thing in one respect, right? It's a commerce thing in another respect, right? When you're punishing and attacking and dealing with pirates, you're trying to keep commerce going. You're trying to prevent the safety of your people, whether that be those traveling on ships, or whether that be pirates marauding onto your land, right? And, I mean, piracy still exists. Not to the scope that it did. I mean, it really does, actually. Just as trading of children still exists today, and horrible things like that, right? But defining a kind of piracy is a big foreign policy power in respect, right? Congress declares war. If you get a foreign policy question, it's probably the #1 wrong answer that people will say. Because we see the president waging war as commander-in-chief, we think he declares it too. We're going to go to war against this, on terror, right? I mean, you can say it all you want, but you don't have the constitutional power to do it, right? So just be aware of kind of the realities of what the Constitution says, and how sometimes it might not be just testing on what you can observe, but on what actually is there, right? Structure. So we'll kind of do a T-chart here, House and Senate on the next couple slides, just to kind of see some comparisons. It's not always a line-by-line comparison, okay? But one of the things to think about is the House is directly elected. And everybody from a House district has basically, some level of kind of equitable population with people from that other House districts in that state, right? Senate, now, I should say, directly elected, originally chosen by state legislatures, right? So we've seen a change over time. Hey, the numbers. We'll do this in the next 3 PowerPoints, kind of a little game of numbers. 435, what's it refer to? Number of people in the House. Then the Constitution. No. Created by a congressional statute, a law. Okay. 25, what's that refer to? Age, yeah. To be in the House, I must at least be 25. 10. Probably the hardest one in that column there. 10 relates to census. Every 10 years, there's a decennial census. Based on those numbers, we reapportion how many seats each state gets out of that 435. You recarve the 435 pie every 10 years, right? Which then means in states you have to redistrict, right? State legislation would have to redistrict. You could run funny ways and shapes, gerrymandering, etc. Okay. 7. Residency. Good. How long you have to be a resident of the United States. Not the state, but the United States. And 2, how many terms can I serve in the House? Many of the people elect me to, right? There's no term limit on that. 2 years is a limit, I guess, right? There's no number of term limit, okay? 100. Number of senators. 30. The minimum age. Notice it's higher than in the House, right? Thus assuming someone maybe has had a little more experience, right? 17. It's an amendment number. Look up at the top of that column. There's your answer to what 17th Amendment does. 9. Your residency again. And 6. The length of your term. Limits there? Nope, just based on what the state legislature prior to 17 or the people after 17 might decide, right? How about these? Let's compare a couple things. It's less, again, line by line comparison, right? So let's just kind of talk down the House. When I think about uniquenesses for the House, right? One of the things is a constitutional provision, I guess, that says that all revenue bills, all bills that reach into your pocket are going to have to start in the House of Representatives. Think about it. The House was originally directly elected. One of the things we rallied against in the American Revolution was taxation without representation. So if we're going to tax, we're going to make the body that has the most direct representation, that would be the House originally, right, have the origin of any revenue bill. Here's where students go off and make a mistake. Oh, because I know that the House originates revenue bills, the House has the power of the purse. You're right, but so does the Senate. All those things in that first couple slides, or first 2 slides, about powers of Congress, implies House, not that implies, is both House and Senate. First in commerce are powers that Congress, which is a bicameral institution, both have, right? So watch that. There's a start with something good, and then you take a step in the wrong way. That's one of the wrong way steps people take. Okay? So a bill that passes, a bill that is going to reach into my pocket, Medicare, Medicaid, income tax, corporate income tax, Social Security, those all start in the House, and they start in, by the way, a committee called Ways and Means, which we'll mention again later. We can maybe scribble it there. Okay, that's not by constitutional mandate. This is by constitutional mandate. The committee is something that, has been created. Another unique thing to the House, not in the Constitution, it's called the Rules Committee. So the House has this committee after a bill has gone through committee, and before it goes to the floor, it goes to this thing called the Rules Committee. What does the Rules Committee do? It puts, in a sense, rules on the bill for how to be debated on the floor. Right? There's process involved here. Know where things fit in process. Right? So the two committees that you just have to know, I think, going into the AP exam in the House are the Rules Committee and the Ways and Means Committee. Okay? Doesn't mean they might not throw other committees on that shit, but probably those two. Doesn't mean they're the answers either. But they appear, I would argue, with more frequency than other committees I've seen. Okay? Another thing unique about the House is this person called the Speaker of the House. There's nothing like it in the Senate. Right? The body as a whole will pick someone who kind of serves to run, in a sense, the show for that entity. Constitutionally, they fall in line with presidential succession. So, who's that speaker now, by the way? Paul Ryan, thank you. Yeah. Paul Ryan, right, from just across the border there from Great America. Okay, when you can smell cheese, right? When you get to Mars Cheese Castle, welcome to Paul Ryan world. Okay, right? Super easy to know where Cheese Castle is. Good, right? And there's another place just down the road from that on the same side of the highway, the west side highway. It's like half a block down from there. I don't remember the name of it. Little white building. Amazing. Go there too. Okay. Get the free samples at the Mars Cheese Castle. Go to the other place to buy your stuff. What is it called? Anyway. But the Speaker of the House is in line of presidential succession. He's 2 heartbeats away, right? Obama and Biden's oh my gosh, and they both died. Bingo. We have Paul Ryan and a Republican who's the president. Boy, would that change things, because he doesn't want to run. But if they both die, he becomes president. You think he'd run then?
Mm-hmm. No.
I'm not trying to create the scenario, but that's really an intriguing one, isn't it? So I'm just thinking now. Hey, something that's unique to the House is that because there's 435 people, that's a lot of people. How do you get business done sometimes? Right? We'll talk about rules and structure a little later, how that matters. But one of the things that is important is the House has this way that can operate as a subset of itself. Usually for business to be done, a little vocab word here, you have to have a certain number of people, called a quorum. Quorum can be set at any number, right? Usually, typically a quorum is like, hey, half plus 1, right? A majority of members present, so we can legitimately do business, okay? What you don't want is if the House has all these seats in this room, and just these people show up, and they pass a bunch of bills, and y'all ain't around. That ain't fair, okay? But maybe with the number of us in this room right now, which is not our whole group, we still might be able to do a whole bunch of things. We couldn't vote on a bill, but we can do a whole bunch of other procedural business if we operate as what's called the committee of the whole. Okay? So we're in a sense like a committee representing the whole. That's why the name makes some sense. Right? So the House can do an awful lot of things, kind of floor stuff, debate oftentimes, to move bills towards votes, but they can't vote on it unless you have a full quorum. Okay? Which is kind of an interesting procedural thing. Hey, unique power to the House. This is in the Constitution, right? Is impeachment. Impeach again means who? Accuse. So the accusation comes from the House. The trying of that accusation is in the Senate. And if the Senate votes with a 2/3 supermajority vote, that individual, president, Supreme Court justice, whatever, is bye-bye. Automatically removed. It's no criminal charge. It's simply a charge for their position. Okay? Another kind of neat constitutional thing that the House can do, right, is if the president, if a presidential candidate, no presidential candidate gets 270, which is a majority, of all the electoral college votes, then the House, with each vote, each state getting 1 vote, gets to decide. That was put in there because, well, think about it. 1, House directly elected, so it's connected to the people, right? 2, with each state just getting 1 vote, you're looking yourselves at the states all being equal. When was this decided? At the Constitutional Convention, when every state came in as an equal, right? I was going to leave, going from like 100% down to 50, okay, right? So you tried to create a balance. It was tasty cake to states. And honestly, from everything I've read about that time, most of the founding fathers thought that that would happen more often than the electors would actually make the pick, right? It hasn't been the case, okay? Hey, on the Senate side, confirm of presidential nominations is a constitutional, right? It's called advise and consent. So if you see that phrase, advise and consent, A-D-V-I-S-E, okay, and consent, that's the saying yes to nominations or saying no to nominations, right? Right? President nominates, Senate confirms. They're given that responsibility. There's no confirmation stuff that the House has except on pieces of legislation, which the Senate has too. But here, the Senate has something unique. Treaties, same thing. House has nothing to do with treaties. The Senate is intricately involved, at least in ratification of them, but probably strategically. You should have them involved if you're the president in the negotiation of them too, so there's buy-in, right? That's a political move versus actually constitutional mandate, okay? There's a person in the president called the President Pro Temp of the Senate. They are not, in a sense, as powerful at all as someone like the Speaker of the House. Speaker of the House is going to sign bills in committees, people in committees, a whole bunch of power like that. But the President Pro Tem is basically kind of like the oldest person in the majority party, and they're given a position of esteem, like, hey, you're the old fart, you get to grab the gavel and call on somebody who can take the floor the whole time while you just like, I'm tired, I need to sit down. Back here, I'm old, you're young, can you take the gavel over and you hand it over to somebody else? I mean, that's President Pro Tem. And yet, ironically, they're 3 heartbeats away from becoming president. What else is unique about the bodies? Well, remember, the House becomes a lot more entrenched in local interests. Why? Well, when you think about it, the House is elected from a district. I mean, it doesn't always hold true. If you're the one House member from North Dakota, you have the same turf that a senator has, right? But if I'm the representative who goes from from the NFL Fest right now out to, Draft Fest or whatever it's called, right? Out to maybe I-294 in Hinsdale, and that's my district right there. My concerns are mainly urban and kind of collar, suburban/urban communities. I'm not concerned about downstate Illinois because my constituents aren't farmers. It's not that they're not connected to agriculture, but there's a whole different connection to agriculture, right? And so my interests are a lot more local, right? My constituency is smaller than somebody who represents the whole state. Right? 53 House members in California, 2 senators cover that whole turf, right? The House is much more about order and control, okay? And so limited debate is much more the norm there, because the Rules Committee puts rules on bills when it goes to the floor, and usually the rule's not, you know what, dude, you can talk however long you want. House also, out of order and control, says you can only make what are called germane changes to bills. In other words, a change you make has to relate to what the bill actually deals with. If it's a bill about bananas, you're not putting in more funding for spaceships. That would not necessarily be germane. On the Senate side, senators become more household names, honestly. Right? Most people can't name a person their House or Senate member, but if they had the list, name how many House members you can name. When we're taking kids in the House chambers, they're like looking and seeing people, I'm like, that's this person, like, okay, never heard of him. That's one, never heard of him. Look at seeing chart, I never heard of him. You go in the Senate, it's like, there's Hillary Clinton. And they're like, oh, it's Hillary. There's Joe Biden. I'm like, oh, I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. They all like just like you do, So anyway, right? Sorry, it's kind of gross. It's true, right? And there are people like, oh, it's like, okay, hi, how are you? But it's more connected to, oftentimes, because it's represents the state, more connected to state interests, is also more connected to national interests, right? We tend to know more, okay? Larger constituencies, usually on average, sometimes larger, right? But also, the Senate is all about freedom, about the power of one, right? So the Senate today is a place where you could have unlimited debate. That's not in the Constitution, okay? The idea of the filibuster, not in the Constitution, but it's created in a sense because of the traditions and how the Senate has evolved. As a body that doesn't as much care about the structure and the rules as it cares about an individual's power. So for instance, for you to do business in the Senate, you have these things called unanimous consent agreements. Everybody's got to agree to do business, otherwise you don't do business. That's the power of one, not the power of group. It's the power of honoring everybody and have buy-in to say, let's do business, right? Just as if one person takes the floor and it's their business, they grind everything to a halt if they want. But that's their business. And we respect it. And you might not like it. You might think they're, a political tool or that they're just being a jerk. But in one sense, you're like, that could be me someday. So I'm going to respect it, right? So that idea, you can put holds on bills. It's a little less so today. But in my lifetime, senators can put holds on bills. There's a bill there, I don't like it. And it was private. You didn't know why is my bill not moving? Because somebody said it sucks and holds it. In the House, that would never happen. You can kill bills in the House, but you have to use a different tactic, right? Than just kind of one person trying to hold it. So when I think about kind of players in the game of legislation or lawmaking, right, or policy making, right, here's a bunch of them. We'll go through these in more detail, right? When I think about parties, I call them the factions of Congress, right? We said factions are those things that are kind of going against the national interest. They're inherently self-interest. They're inevitable. You're going to have them. But guess what? We put things in place that can check and temper and control them, right? That's all from Federalist 10. But parties are kind of the factions of Congress, just as interest groups are factions as well, right? Committees are kind of called the engines of Congress. The real work of Congress is done in committee. It's not done on debate on the floor. It's done in committees. You can't get work done among 435 people. You've got to subdivide into smaller, more focused groups. That's where work gets done. Every member of Congress has a whole bunch of helpers. They have helper agencies. The Congressional Budget Office help them run numbers. Right? They have the CRS, Congressional Research Service, to help them get information on bills. They have the OMB. No, they have the CEO. Mentioned that. Anyway, there's another one. But they also have staff, their own personal staff, and they have staff assigned to committees who can do research, who can help facilitate the process, etc. So there's a whole bunch of people who are the helpers. Now, you're on committees where you serve, and there's reasons you serve on those committees, but then you also can engage in smaller little meetings, or a caucus meeting, of similar interests. These don't have to fall under partisan lines. But for instance, I don't know, I mean, if there's... It's very loud here, that's kind of nice actually. In the hall, you can't hear yourself. You have groups that would be kind of race or ethnically oriented, right? Hispanic Caucus, Congressional Black Caucus. You have steel caucuses and mushroom caucuses, right? You have younger representatives. You have those believe that we should live within our budget means. Huh? Dreamers. Right, there's this group called the Blue Dog Coalition. Right? They would have big things outside their offices in the halls of the office places. They would say Blue Dog Coalition. They were clearly identifying themselves. They would get together and they were really fiscal conservatives. But they had a lot of Democrats who felt like we should live within our means. It's a common sense thing. It's not like big government versus, devolved to small government. It was like anybody should live within their means. So should Congress and so should our country. Right? So they would caucus together. Right? Those are, in a sense, kind of mini factions, I call them. For lawmaking, we'll look at some of the kind of processes, right? Having a Rules Committee in the House is a process. Okay. The President, I kind of consider the checker of Congress. If Congress has the main dominant legislative or lawmaking power, who tempers or checks or controls them? Also, who influences them? That would be interest groups, lobbyists of Congress, right? Now, lastly, yes, the President's the checker, but also once Congress passes something to the President, his agencies, the bureaucracy, becomes the implementers. Okay. So let's kind of go into more depth on that. Hey, I don't have a video, but we do have that little picture, and you can also do it yourself, right? Or watch that music later. So if we're going through that, if you get to that go to law process, right? The first thing is somehow somebody comes up with an idea. Whether that be they see a need, whether that be some event happens, etc. But it starts as an idea. The problem is, you can't put that idea into action without somebody in the body actually sponsoring the bill. So like for Mr. Brady and I on that Illinois Global Scholar stuff. Might be a great idea. I hope it is. We'll find out over time probably. But fundamentally, we needed to get people in the House and the Senate and the Illinois General Assembly to actually sponsor the bill. Right? So until I can get somebody to sponsor it, it doesn't exist. Right? Legislatively, we didn't have to do the money thing, by the way. But this is for research groups and campaign relations, so open up opportunities for some people to sponsor. Once you introduce the bill, the House goes in the hopper, and then usually, Mr. Paul Ryan, or the handsome man that he is, I chose to use the plain face one versus the bearded picture he was going with for a while. But he'll have an involvement in assigning bills to committees, right? So the bill is written up, it's given a number, HB whatever, or HB 4983, that's ours, or Senate Bill 2469, that's ours, right? But then it goes to committees, right? So you have an idea, you create the bill, you get it introduced, it gets assigned to committee, this is where the work's going to get done, right? So in committee, bills are going to have particular things. Kind of two things to think about for bills, right? In committee, actually, we'll go to subcommittee, how about? Because the bill goes to the full committee, but then it really gets assigned to something a little more specific, right? We take a big committee like all you guys in here, that's a pretty big amount of people, so we give it to something a little more specific. This group, which has a specific part of policy-making focus, and gets this bill. That's a subcommittee. What are they going to do? They might bring me as an expert to give some testimony, right? That's a hearing. I get heard by them. Lobby, 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 right? Using my big expertise on information or something to talk to them, to address their questions, express and kind of persuade, right? And then they go and kind of close the door and they do peer editing, or what's called a mark-up session. Took a while for okay. It's subtle, I know. It's like when it has a hint of hibiscus in the tea or something, you know? But anyway. Where do I think of these things? But again, this is the work of Congress. This is work done in committee or subcommittee. Hey, by the way, remember, committees and subcommittees are the graveyard of bills. Most bills die here, right? Some that don't die get reported. Well, they could get reported unfavorably, which is death. They get reported favorably, which is like, yay, it passed. Okay, right? If they do get reported favorably in the House, it's then going to go to the Rules Committee, right? Actually, probably if it was subcommittee, it would go back to full committee, where the whole process could happen again. You could do a hearing. You could do a whole other markup as full committee. Usually full committee is like, you trust the parts. So you get back to full committee. Yeah, they said yes, great, okay, what's going on? You guys said yes, and here's yeah. You guys said yes, and being on, they smooth things out, right? Because you trust, you got to trust what each of the parts doing, okay? Ultimately, the bill goes to the floor. In a House, in particular, the Rules Committee has put rules on how it's going to be debated, right? From open rule, closed rule, kind of vocab stuff, right? But they'll decide the things of like how many people speak, how long can they speak, what kind of vote we're going to take. All that stuff's usually decided ahead of time. Okay, that's the power of the Rules Committee. By the way, a bill could die in the Rules Committee. Bills die there. Most of them die in committee, right? But something makes it out of committee, still die in the Rules Committee. Okay. Ultimately, there's a vote on the bill, and based on that vote, it's a positive vote. Woo, it passes, it goes over to the Senate. Remember, bills don't have to go House then Senate. I know it's a nice linear thing, it makes sense, but bills can start at Senate and go to the House. Okay? I mean, the crazy, right? Illinois Global Scholar, we just put the same bill into both houses at the same, well, roughly at the same time when the sponsor decided to move it, right? But it passed out of the House, passed out of the Senate. The House has taken up the Senate version of the bill because it has to pass both houses. The Senate has taken up the House version of the bill. It's utter craziness. Find out this afternoon that, let's see, the House version that the Senate has taken up. No, the Senate version, no, the House version, yeah. The House version that the Senate has taken up, right? Because now there's two of the same bill in each body, right? There's the original Senate one in the Senate and the House one that came over, and there's the original House one in the Senate. So it's like crazy. But we found out, hey, great. We think maybe passed going through committee again. Like it jumped that because the bill hasn't been changed, I think. And it's kind of in a position to have what's called a second reading. Once that's done, it's a technical thing. It would actually move to third reading. And if the third reading is, again, just a technical thing, we would take it to the floor to vote. That's what we're hoping happens. They don't get in until next week, and it's May 3rd for that day. So it's like, okay, I think that was a good step forward today, right? Because one House has to pass both bills. And it decides to go on the governor. In this, that's Illinois, but it kind of follows similar procedures here, okay? If a bill is different from the House and the Senate that deal with the same substance, and it's not the same, like your body's changed it one way and your body's changed it another way, you have to have a conference committee. What's another vocab word that will connect with conference committee? Joint, right? It's a joint committee. Not all joint committees are conference committees, but all conference committees are going to be joint committees. Meaning, you're going to have House and Senate members together, right? One of the few times they actually get together. You could have a joint committee of some sort. Sometimes it's a select committee, something for a short-term limited purpose to investigate something, and you want House and Senate members to investigate it. Other times, you have, when a bill isn't the same, it's been passed by both bodies, it doesn't go to the president. It has to get reconciled in its differences. By the way, if they can't agree, the bill dies. So it could die in conference too, even though both houses have passed it. Until they can get it the same, They won't move anywhere. By the way, after they agree on something, it goes back to each house because they probably have made changes. Right? So procedurally, it has to go back again. Then it doesn't need to go back to conference. If the House says yes to this new bill, with it's been agreed upon, the Senate says yes to the new bill, it's agreed upon, the same bill, bingo, it goes right to the president. Okay. What can the president do? Well, he has a couple different options. He can say, woohoo! And make it a law, right? He can also attach a signing statement to kind of say, here's how I'm going to interpret this bill and apply it, right? He can say, I don't like that bill, so I'm going to veto it. I forbid elected opinions, right? By the way, don't forget, in your lifetime, seriously, I haven't tallied it officially, but there's got to be less than like 20 vetoes in your lifetime. It's such a powerful tool, but it's used so rarely. Why? Well, one, because veto threats work. So if I'm president, when I go to your subcommittee and I find out some stuff, and by the way, I don't go, right? Presidents don't show up on Capitol Hill very often. It's called State Union Address, that's about it, right? But I might send some, intern to run over and convey something, or maybe I shoot something via email to a committee chair or something like that, or the ranking member, the minority party chair. If I send somebody a little higher up, one of my official full-term staff, right, it means a little more. I could go public as president and apply, shaping public opinion tactics to put pressure on you guys who actually care about elections, right, because you're all elected officials out there. They could apply some pressure to you. Or, that's kind of going public, or I could just veto it when it comes to me, but usually it doesn't have to go that far. Okay. And yet, for every check, there's a counter check. There's the counter check, right? You can, as Congress, override that presidential veto. So the president says you suck, you can say you suck more, and and you can override that veto. It needs a 2/3 vote, not total, but of each house, okay, independently of the other. Vetoes and veto threats work. It can be overridden. Frequently is not. Okay. How's Congress organized, right? I kind of said in class there's 3 main ways Congress is organized. It's organized in the House and Senate, so it's bicameral. It's structured around a majority party and a minority party in each of those, right? And then I said it's also organized in committees, right? So those are kind of, to me, the 3 organizing principles, structurally, right, of this body, okay? Now, what do I have up there? Okay, organized around party control, right? Organized around size constraints. Well, think about that. The House with 435 people for 100 plus years now, right, is all about rules and order. Why? Because with 435 people, you need structure to get stuff done. And committees are structured. How do you get stuff done among 435 and lots of bills? You subdivide it. It's division of labor, right? You guys understand that in group projects, right? If you're efficient. If not, then it's like, well, I'm just not going to do anything because I know that that person cares and is going to get all the stuff done, okay? Welcome to the burden, right, of if it was all laid upon one committee or something like that. None of you are usually pleased with that, except you produce quality work, right? And you're like, I hate the other 5 on my team, okay? Sorry, just begging for my daughter. I've never seen that happen. What was your high school work? It's fair, but justice will come. No, anyway. But when I think about the Senate, right, we said it's like herding cats, right? The power of one, freedom, unlimited debate, things like the filibuster, okay? Leadership and leaders, we're going to talk a little more about that in a minute. But it's organized in committees. Sometimes those caucuses are smaller organizational things, not as formal though, right? And as well, adding to this idea of organization, let's throw in the power that incumbency has. Yes, we know that the number 1 advantage you have in Congress after you're there is that you're there, right? The power of incumbency. We'll have a slide on that coming up. But 2 things come to mind. Incumbency, and the longer one has been there, kind of creates a hierarchy. This is not formal rule. This is just like the rule of thumb. It's kind of the way it should be, right? Let's take 2 senators from the same state. Let's say they're in the same party. One is called the senior, doesn't even matter if they're in different parties. There's the senior senator and the junior senator, okay? Especially if they're of the same party. The senior senator is supposed to defer to the junior senator. Make me, goes the junior senator. Maybe I can't. But I'll show a lot of political pressure against you. I'll make sure bills that, and I'll take party leadership. If even a minority party, make sure bills you care about don't make it through. Right? There's ways to fight back. So people play the game. I'm the junior, I defer to the senior. Why? For the same reason in a certain culture you respect elders and you say it in your language differently, right? Some of you are involved in some of those cultures, right? It's part of the culture. There's deference given to older. Whether that's appropriate or whatever, sometimes it's cultural. It's kind of cultural here, right? There is a seniority system in Congress. Not to mention, part of it is that if I've been there longer, I'm probably in a leadership position. So you don't want to toe the line? Great. We'll find ways to make it not work for you then, right? You want to bring back pork to your district, you want to go put stuff in bills, right? So you better play the game, so I'll let you do that. Otherwise, we'll kind of take some of your stuff out in a little markup session there, right? There's those kind of tactics. So the seniority system adds power, particularly to those who are more senior, right? Structurally, it might look like that. In the House, the highest ranking person is the Speaker. Okay? They are the highest ranking person. They're also a member of the majority party. But because they run the body, they kind of sometimes have to distance themselves a bit from that. They are not truly the party's floor leader. That's called the majority leader. The majority and minority leaders are the elected floor leaders for their party. They leave their party's interests on the floor. And they have helpers. One of their main helpers is the person called the majority and minority whip. They're really called the assistant floor leaders as well. For whip, we said there's... there are two things. Sorry, sorry. There are two things that, remember, we want to say about whips. They're the arm twister and the head counter, right? The role of a whip, right, is to make sure that when a vote's coming, I've kind of twisted people's arms to vote the way I want, particularly people in my own party, right? And that they're going to be there. I'm going to share that story, I think, this story to some sex semester students. The first time Mr. Brady and I went down to Springfield to give testimony to the Senate Ed Committee, there were a couple people that we knew on the committee that had already signed up to support the bill. They were our co-sponsors, and one of our chief co-sponsors. And as we were going to their offices before the testimony, we just wanted to drop in and say hi and meet them possibly. And one was like, oh yeah, she's not going to be in town. Like one of our head sponsors wasn't going to be there. And somebody else we found out wasn't going to be there that we knew would like be a vote for the bill. We're like, okay, we're going to this committee, we're going to give testimony here and answer their questions and stuff like that. And two of the people that, in a sense, are for us aren't there. Right? I mean, seriously, we kind of started freaking out a little bit. We're like, Christ, this is not good. It was fine, everybody voted for it. But in one respect, I kind of thought like, dang, we needed a whip. We needed someone who was head counting who was going to be there that day, right? That's what the whip does. So they play kind of a functional purpose in the body, okay? Right? Committees are where the work gets done. But the idea here is that work gets done best when you decentralize it, okay? You could argue as well it's fragmented, right? And that is a challenge. Federalism fragments, right? Having parties, majority, minority fragments, right? We're all senators, but we don't all agree. We all sit in the same basic seats. By the way, the senators don't sit in assigned seats. House members assign seats. Senators sit wherever they want. Okay. So usually they stand and talk a lot. But not even just with a filibuster. If you ever watch the Senate, they're like, the thing's supposed to start at 10. It's 10:30, and they're all like standing around talking and doing this. I'm like, get to work! I think they're working. I guess they're making deals or something. I don't know. Hey, 4 types of committees, right? Just vocab review. Joint committee, we said again, as House and Senate members, right? Standing committee, those permanent committees where the work going to get done. You're going to have things that come up again and again, year after year. You make those into standing committees, right? Select committee, we said, is short-term, limited purpose. They're oftentimes investigatory. The House Select Committee on Benghazi and is Hillary Clinton a bad Secretary of State, right? Or the Joint Select Committee investigating whether Hillary Clinton and her emails is bad and inappropriate, blah, 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 right? It's those kind of things oftentimes. The 9/11 Joint Committee, right? Those things, investigation, were there security lapses, you think, right? Did we know ahead of time? No. Did we know that kind of stuff, right? And the conference committee we already talked about. It's a type of joint committee, right? House and Senate members reconcile differences in the bill. When I think about committees in Congress, okay, I kind of think these things like pop into my head, right? So as I think about it, it might be, okay, we know that every person who runs a committee is a chair. Every person who runs a subcommittee is called a chair. They are always a member of the majority party. Okay? Actually, that always is about probably 97% of the time, but what's as normal as always if I can learn it. Every subcommittee headed by a member of the majority party. The majority party gets that benefit all the way through the whole body. Okay? What we also might know is that there's a bunch of helpers, staff assigned on that committee to help people with research, to help people with logistics, etc. Okay? One of the things that committees typically do is hold hearings. And hearings are opportunities for input, right? They're going to create pieces of legislation and attach funding to it that the bureaucracy is going to use for implementation. So the bureaucracy is trying to give input about what they want and why they should get it, right? Interest groups who are going to be influenced by what the bureaucracy does and what this legislation is are wanting input to influence representatives to put in stuff that they want and have bureaucracy implement it the way they want, right? So there's that dialogue that's there, right? And as well, if you're a representative, you want appropriate committee assignments that relate to you bringing benefits back to your constituents. So the idea of the assignments I get could be positioning myself for more exposure nationally if I maybe have a different trajectory, right? But fundamentally, it's probably putting it in, one, areas of passion, areas of interest, but also areas to wield some influence to help you get re-election and also to bring benefit back to your district or to your state, right? Strategically. But I named the three, kind of, particularly the top two, of the House committees. You just kind of got to know by name and number, okay? Not number, just name, sorry. The number. Right? But you should know Ways and Means. That's that one again where revenue bills start in the House. Ways and Means is going to be that committee. That's a connection you need to know, right? So Ways and Means is not constitutional. It's the committee the House has created for that constitutional process of the House having revenue bills first. And because bills go to committees, there's going to be a committee that's going to handle that. It's going to be Ways and Means. So if you're chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, any bill that's changing any tax code in America goes to your committee, you are some powerful dude. For Paul Ryan to give that position up to become Speaker, I think he had to debate that. He's a policy wonk who loves numbers. He likes that kind of stuff. To have to try to then run this body versus like control your committee and your little fiefdom, not an easy decision, honestly. Rules is that other one, right? Because it's unique to the House. Okay. Two very powerful ones in the Senate because of media exposure and because of role play, right? Foreign Relations Committee. Senate Foreign Relations would be involved in that treaty-making process, right? Particularly for the, the ratification process, but they're probably involved in actually the treaty negotiation process if you're doing it politically well. And Judiciary is the one that would be involved in any confirmation of judicial appointments, from federal district judges to appellate judges to Supreme Court justices, right? So right now, Merrick Garland, who's been nominated as president, is not getting a hearing in the Senate. Why? Because the Senate Judiciary, headed by a Republican, is saying, yeah, we're not going to hear it. There's the power of chairs, right? So the many factions, right, caucuses, can take on various forms, right? In the regional, like the academic, agricultural, economic, ideological, right? Maybe some particular special interests or something like that, okay? Incumbency, right? Once you're there, it's not inherently yours to keep, but actually there was something I was reading this morning. You've seen charts, right, that talk about, Senate incumbency rate is more volatile than the House incumbency rate, right? More frequency of election for the House, but basically, House is about 10% return rate, right? Senate, it varies, okay? So the House has a higher return rate than the Senate does, on the whole. Here's what I read this morning. If I'm the incumbent, I still have to win my primary, right? The average return rate of incumbents in the House is about 10%, 90%, sorry. But the average winning in a primary of an incumbent is about 2-point-something%. Sorry, 97-point-something%. I'm switching the numbers in my head. You're like, how do you know that? I know math, you don't know. I got college credit for math, so okay. Sorry. Please don't worry. So, but think about that. It was just Tuesday that the first, 40 states have voted so far. Okay, we got 10 states left in our kind of presidential onslaught journey to whatever. Okay, 40 states have already voted. It was just Tuesday, for the first time, that an incumbent House member trying to seek renomination in his party, or her party, lost. The first time in 40 states. Which covers, who knows, 300 some House members maybe? Now again, not all those are wanting a return, right? Some of them are open seats, okay? But of those seeking a return, all of them so far have won their particular party's primary or caucus to run against somebody else for them to maintain that incumbency, right? That's the power of incumbency. It's these kind of things that make that stat at the like 2.3% level. Sorry, 97 point something% level, okay? Or non-return at 2.3, right? I was just floored when I read that stat. Like, dang, I had no idea it was that low, okay? That's the reason why it's that low, okay? Those kind of things. So if you get a question on incumbency in any way, shape, or form, right? Those are some of your go-to things. Remember to differentiate pork and casework, or casework also equals constituent services. Casework is something I do for you individually. You got a problem with bureaucracy, I fix it. And you vote for me. Pork is what I give to all y'all, okay? I can give pork that benefits a few, right? But it's still oftentimes doled out through some type of federal grant, through some funding for a new program that touches more than one, okay? So pork barrel, it's oftentimes called pork barrel legislation. Casework is not a legislative thing at all, except that it might divert my attention from legislation because I'm spending time trying to get your check through Social Security office, right? It could draw my attention to legislation because I see there's some needs that we could fix and then they come in to save the day, right? But fundamentally, pork has a broader reach, okay? Casework is case by case. Pork is stuff that we all get, okay? What are some criticisms of Congress? Well, related to pork, right? One, in some senses, is pork is doled out to people that are asking for it, okay? So one of the things that, like, is Congress after the highest bidder, right? Are we just creating kind of Christmas tree bills here, right? Just put all this stuff on, also put one more thing and it falls over because we put too much on the tree, right? And is that what we're trying to do? No wonder we have so much debt. We're just putting all these things into bills, right? I mean, that's the criticism of Congress, right? But don't forget, the flip side of that is when I decided to benefit your district by providing some funding in a transportation bill, which is funny for lots of people, you guys get that rail line fixed. You guys get that new bridge. You guys get that harbor dredged. You guys get that airport put in. You get that new post office. You get, and you getting is construction jobs. If it's better roads, it means it lessens damage on your vehicles. If you're a business owner, that's bottom line, more profit for you, right? Those are good things. Pork, somebody else's, as much as pork is a dirty word, it's also jobs. Not necessarily dirty jobs, but good, right? But fundamentally, it's good stuff for people. Congress spending is not bad. Overspending? I might talk about why that's a bad thing. Right? You can go down by, Knock Knolls now and ride that nice little paved trail all through there, and there's still a little awesome mountain bike ones you can go play on and stuff like that. Right? But on those paved trails, they weren't there when you were little kids. But they are there because, let's see, Obama had was looking for shovel-ready projects to help re-stimulate the economy when we first became president. And we said, we got one! And we got money. We finished that project off. It had been designed years ago. We had the funding for it. Now we've got a place for entertainment and physical, just hanging out, right? Hey, Logrolling. That idea of you guys trade votes all the time. As much as you trade answers on homework, right? But the idea of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. That's what Logrolling is. There's times where I need you to vote for my bill, and there's times where I need to vote for your bill. We trade votes. That's Logrolling. It's also called reciprocity. Every year there's one word on the test that people are oh, what was that? Right? Litigation lawsuit's one of them. Logrolling's been another one. Reciprocity's been another one. Those are actually the same thing, right? Casework was another one year. I don't know what this year's will be. I sure hope it's something we've hit in the last couple of weeks, right? I don't know. Wish I did. If I did, I'd be really torn. Do I tell you or not? I don't know. But that's why it's good I don't know, right? What's another criticism? No term limits. You're how old and you've served? You can't even go to the bathroom anymore. How can you serve Congress, right? Whatever. Sorry. Did I go too far now? No. Right? But this idea, right? Congress does not mirror the great society in terms of gender diversity, in terms of racial diversity, in terms of socioeconomic diversity, educational diversity. That does not mean that we should start electing those stupid poor people. But it does mean, some say that if you keep the same old white guys there for a long, long, long time, same old white guys that have got this little system going aren't going to necessarily bring things that totally connect to people, but they'll get you enough pork and casework to get your vote. I don't know what's best or right in that. I don't think you should have term limits. I don't know. People freely elect them in districts, of course, that have been carved so that they know they're going to win, right? But there's lots of layers of this story, okay? But ultimately, unless you saw, every once in a while, Republicans have taken the high horse on this once in a while and saying, you know what? We're going to self-impose term limits on our people. We're only going to have 2 terms and then we're out. Well, that's beautiful. And then you're like, after 2 terms, you're like, wait a minute, if we step out, that means that the other party might get that. Or I kind of like this position of power. Somebody else might get it. So, we say anything about term limits, we just think, well, you know what, the need is still so great that I think I'm going to stay. Right? They do this kind of hogwash, right? So, if you really think that's a factor or a goal, ultimately you got to change the Constitution. So let's look at some links of Congress to some different things. So we'll kind of go through these. So I don't need to stand this slide for too long. But Congress, the 3 words I've used in relationship of one branch to another is Congress creates, funds, and oversees. Right? So if you get questions about Congress, person commerce, and process-wise, I'd say Congress creates bureaucratic agencies, funds bureaucratic agencies, and then has oversight over them. Right? Using that illustration of, I as a parent have created my children, I fund my children, and I have oversight over my children. Right? So how does Congress monitor the bureaucracy? Right? How do they check them? Right? What influence do they have in response? Or, I don't know how they would phrase it a different way. But if they do something like this, it's in your wheelhouse. Right? So Congress monitors bureaucracy through hearings. I don't like what they're doing, I bring them in, and part of my oversight responsibility is say, hey, why'd you spend the money that way? Hey, why'd you decide that? Hey, how come that happened? Right? I mean, I don't know who dropped the ball on this Flint stuff. But Congress is going to, certain committees, Environment and Public Works Committee, right, is going to be looking to have some hearings to bring in, federal EPA people, state level EPA people, Flint water manager people, the governor, right, bring him in, right, and the governor, state level government will do this too, but the feds will do it. 1, because it might look good, it's a good press op, but 2, because they have some responsibility. I mean, if your kid does something wrong, I can't just go, oh, that's how she is, or that's how he is. I can. But I would say that's not parenting. I mean, you want to teach them a lesson, that's one thing, right? But just to neglect it and say, yeah, that's how they are, and take no responsibility for it. Obviously, remember, person commerce. Budget. If you have something about Congress connected to something and you're not thinking about budget in there, you're missing the boat. Okay? Delegated discretionary authority. Defined. Delegated authority, right? It's an interesting check in a process, right? States ultimately get to decide to draw them how they want. They can redistrict them how they want with some federal rules, like 1 person, 1 vote, right? Versus Sanders, Reynolds versus Sims, okay? But redistricting is really done on the state level. The national standards are for equal protection. The states are the implementers, based on that standard, okay? When I think about congressional representation, right, we mentioned this earlier, so it's really just review, right? We talk about census. We can talk about reapportionment, which is what the Census Bureau does, and saying now you get 20 versus 18 or something. Now redraw your map in your state with 20 districts instead of 18. Make them all the same population, right? Reflect communities of interest, right? Make them contiguous. Try to make them relatively compact, right? Limit how you gerrymander, even if you're doing, partisan gerrymanders are legit. Court has said consistently, you can draw things to benefit a party. The problem is, it gets kind of messy. If I want to benefit the Democrats, I might draw certain parties or races possibly that might vote more Democrat in certain ways. Now, am I doing a racial gerrymander or am I doing a partisan gerrymander? That's where it gets messy. It can get messy pretty quickly, right? In that respect. Incumbent gerrymanders work too. Usually, historically, that's been the powerful one. Lines are drawn to keep the elected people safe. But notice the state officials are drawing lines to keep the people good at DC safe. In both parties. It's kind of an intriguing process there, right? Remember, we have in any one of those districts for House races, the idea of how you win is you win with a plurality. Whoever gets the most votes in a House race wins. And they get the whole seat, which is the idea of winner take all, okay? And it's a single member district, because only one person represents you guys in the House of Representatives, okay? Bill Foster, right? Only one person represents me, Peter Rockman. Hey, Congress in the budget. So a little bit about this, because Congress is related to money, big time, right? Who are the two big budgeting agencies? One's for the president, one's for Congress, right? The OMB, Office of Management and Budget, is in a sense the president's budgetary helpers. And what they do in the process is they prepare that budget. So the president is the beginner of the budget. He creates it, puts it all together based on his values and orders, etc. All the agencies make requests. It's all assembled through the OMB. The OMB basically then hands it over to Congress, who has that two keyword power. They authorize everything to be spent, and then they actually give you the money. Right? Authorization and appropriation. No money goes out unless Congress has appropriated it, because they have the power of the purse. Oh yeah, that makes sense. Okay, the power of the purse is to give you the money, but it has to be authorized by Congress and then actually given to you, appropriated. Okay? The CBO is kind of the key congressional monetary player. Right? So the Congressional Budget Office, right? In a sense, one, prepares the congressional response to the president's budget, but two, also kind of serves as when Congress says they have certain numbers, and the president says he has certain numbers, it's because there's different agencies creating the numbers. The CBO comes up with congressional plans for expenditures and how much this program is going to cost. The OMB comes up with the presidential version of that. And sometimes when the numbers don't match, it's because different agencies use different calculus